Walter E. Williams is our guest. We had a bizarre power outage here in the studio. We're on backup. We'll see if we can stay on the air here together. Mr. Williams, continuing, GM, the trillions to the banks, and the government's now saying they're just going to expand and intensify all of this. Are they going to just continue to dump money on this until they completely destroy us, or how do you see this unfolding?
Well, I don't know. I think a lot of things that they're doing is unsustainable, but I think that the whole idea about Detroit and GM and other companies going bankrupt, I think that people don't quite understand what bankruptcy means. If they did, I don't think they would let government get away with what they're doing. That is, it's almost when you hear people talk, if an airline goes bankrupt or if an auto company goes bankrupt, people talk as if the company, the productive assets are going to go poof and disappear into thin air. Like if an airline went bankrupt, the airline's going to go poof and disappear into thin air, or the assembly line in Detroit will go poof. No, what bankruptcy means is that there's a change in the title to those assets. Somebody else will own those assets if it ultimately goes bankrupt, but there's an intermediate step. They can go to Chapter 11 first. But the point is that when government bails out companies, they're telling them, keep on doing what you're doing. See, the important thing about a market system is that business failure is just as critical to the operation of a market system as business success. That is, business success says you're doing the right thing, you're pleasing your customers, and you're doing it in a reasonable way. Excuse me. Business failure means that you're not pleasing your customers or you're doing it in an inefficient way. You're wasting resources of the society. Now, when government steps in to bail out a failing business, it in effect says, continue wasting the resources of society. Here's the money. Americans won't buy your damn cars, so here's some money. We'll take some money from the Americans and give it to you.
Well, Mr. Williams, expanding on that, the media keeps confusing this and saying capitalism failed. Now we've got to have socialism with the cover of Newsweek. That's a grand deception. I've noticed they've been parroting as a talking point. This isn't free market that did this. This was the state merging with some type of crony, insider corruption. What do you call that? How do you boil that down and explain this is a bait and switch?
People call it crony capitalism, and that is, just give you one example. We had this with the housing market, that we had this Community Reinvestment Act that intimidated banks into making loans that they otherwise would not have made. Now, banks would not lend people to buy a house, to buy a $200,000, $500,000 house with no money down. It required that government intimidate banks to do that. That's not capitalism. Under a free market system, a banker would not do that. He will do it when the government says, we want you to do it, unless we're not going to give you a merger. And then plus, if we had this Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to buy the rotten paper that you sell. And so it's not capitalism at all. It's socialism that has failed, but the news media and politicians are doing a bait and switch. They're deceiving the American people.
Well, Mr. Williams, in the few minutes we have left with you, what is your solution? How do we get out of this? Just educate the public that it's a fraud? Because there are all these corrupt corporate interests that are not free market, that are some of the biggest corporations in the world, and they've made an alliance with corrupt government and then with the dumbed-down kind of howling mob, as John Adams would call it. I mean, how do we deal with this?
I'm not sure. I think that we can't deal with politicians. They're hopeless in terms of respect for the Constitution. What we have to do, and I think that talk radio has been very, very important on a number of the blogs have been we have to somehow sell the American people on the moral superiority of individual liberty, which means limited government. We have to sell the American people on individual responsibility. We have to sell the American people that Americans are very generous, and we have to tell people that, look, helping your fellow man in need is praiseworthy and laudable when you reach into your own pockets to help them out. when you reach into somebody else's pockets to help your fellow man in need, that is worthy of condemnation, and it's despicable. And for the Christians among us, we should recognize that when God gave Moses the commandment, thou shalt not steal, he did not mean thou shalt not steal unless you got a majority vote in Congress. And moreover, if you ask God, well, is it okay to be a recipient of stolen property, he would probably consider that a sin as well. That is, the big problems that we face in our society right now are moral problems.
And the big question is, when does the stealing end? The big question is, I mean, if you accept any of this theft, then the sky's the limit. WalterEWilliams.com. Thank you so much for spending time with us, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
Take care. Have a great week coming up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back live. They've turned off the power in this end of Austin. We're on backup power. We'll see what happens. We'll see if we can go to the press